Are we good? All right, well, welcome back from the break. There's no excuse for not paying attention, lots of coffee, so if you don't pay attention, I know it's me, and that's all right. Uh, as I was coming here and looking at all the bios and comparing myself to some of the other speakers, I felt like I was in the minority, and I was trying to figure out should I really still be doing this? I don't have a traditional education or upbringing in design. I am a boring business strategist with an MBA and a bunch of strategy consulting, and I've been inside corporations now running strategy groups and some innovation. I did run an innovation group, and I've had some P&L experience in ownership. And this is cool dress for me, you know what I mean? Like blue shoes and like kind of cutting edge here, that's me. So, but when Amy said earlier that we're all designers and we should have a purpose, I guess that's probably why I'm here. And I'd like to provide you some perspectives from more of the business side of how that works with design. And I'm focusing on experience strategy. So I'm not going to be talking about experience more down at the production level, closer to the agile teams, but really when you're applying design thinking to strategy questions, okay? And I think what will be helpful is providing sort of a senior leader perspective of this work, because senior leaders are responsible for strategy. So if you're doing experience strategy, that's your client. And I will tell you, for quite a bit of those leaders, the language we're all using here even today is very abstract, and it's hard for them to consume it. Very few senior executives are at the very top of a large corporation because they come from a design background. So let's get into it. So I'm going to share my experience through sort of 5 questions and learning that I think will help bring some clarity and really drive communication and dialogue, probably at the break, hopefully. But I hired a design firm in 2016 to do experience strategy because we had just come off a business unit strategy, which was highly transformational for our financial group at USAA. And as we started to implement that strategy, it became very clear that we had thought through the implications of how our members, which are our customers, would interact with us, but not at a level where it was very executable. And so knowing experience strategy, and I advocated let's do an experience strategy. And when I was going to the senior executives, they were like, what does that mean? And then we were doing the work, it was very clear that it was hard to communicate to them the impact that it was going to have on their business. So I became the bridge between the experience and the strategy and the design thinking and the leader. So I'd like to share some of that learning through 5 questions or concepts that I hope that will make a difference for all of you. One is, how do you define experience strategy? So let me ask a question in the audience. Please raise your hand if you believe that experience strategy is a real domain within design thinking, human-centered design, and you could define it if I brought this microphone down and asked you. I won't do that, but raise your hand if you think you know what experience strategy is. It's amazing to me because I thought it would be the opposite. Very few hands went up. I'd say well less than 10%. And I would say, though, well, you're at a good conference because I just picked this up from MadPow, so they got a whole brochure on it. So I think you're in a good place. But no offense, MadPow, but I'm looking through your brochure and I can't find a good definition of experience strategy. I find a lot of descriptions. I find some activities. Let's read a couple. Existing customer experience auditing and mapping. Okay, customer advocacy and persona development, strategic experience value proposition design, experience road mapping, communication platforms. If I said this to some of the top 15 people at USAA, they wouldn't know most of that language. And for us at USAA, that was a problem, because we are customer-centric. If you know anything about us, we are highly, highly customer-centric. But we've been very product-centric through that customer centricity. And we've been on a journey to become more experience-based, and our leaders are still learning this. So just something to keep in mind. So let me take a shot at it. Here's my take at what experience strategy is versus business strategy. Business strategy has at least 4 elements: a vision, a who, your target, right? Who you're designing your strategy for, your how are you going to win and differentiate, and then your metrics, how can you measure success? I posit to you that experience strategy is in support of that business strategy. It's a part of the how, and it influences the metrics, because for many companies, our metrics are far too business-oriented around financial things and others. So your business strategy sets the parameters for your experience strategy. The vision and the who, right? It's very, very important if you're going to do an experience strategy piece of work. As well as, what are your business goals for that strategy? What do you have to support as an experience strategy? And as a matter of fact, it also sets some other limitations for the actual work you're going to do. In such, when we were working with this design firm, one of the early questions was, okay, I got to understand, am I designing with the budget for a Ford or a Lamborghini? And it wasn't, does the customer going to drive a Ford or a Lamborghini? It was a process question about, what is your belief and your values and your support of this experience, and what's your budget as a company? Because we'll make the experience great for your member, but I have to know how we're going to be able to achieve it and make it real. What sort of budget do you have? That's all part of business strategy. The experience strategy is all around, right, the customer touch points, the emotions, the cognitive and the emotional elements of how the customers will interact with you. And that's the part of the how. It's a huge part of the business strategy of the how, of how you will differentiate and win. But it's got to make that business strategy come to life. And what we found is that they're quite symbiotic, your business strategy and your experience strategy. As you're doing the experience work with design thinking techniques and better understanding what your customers really want and need within the construct of your business strategy, it may make you back up and say, wait a minute, do we have to rethink some of our decisions we've made with our business strategy? I think that's phenomenal. It's really hard to bring senior executives along who think they've made a decision and know what their strategy is, and then say, well, through this other design methodology we're learning, we might need to think about things differently. Your organization has to be ready for that. You have to have more of a flexible and agile strategy process, which most companies do not have. So there is tension there to keep in mind. So again, these 5 things I'll go through, I won't have all the answers. It's just I'm trying to raise some things for you to think about, as either if you're a consulting firm or a design agency working with clients, or if you're within those client organizations. All right, let's go on to the next question. And I probably need to pick up pace. Mike, I told you that would happen. When do you need an experience strategy? Well, it's usually easier to define something on the not. Right? So I would posit you don't need an experience strategy when your strategy is mature and working, your business strategy, where you have experienced work going on and experienced teams stood up, and you've got processes that are working. And of course, you've got design thinking and agile teams fighting every day to make that better for your customer, but you're making something working well even better. I would say you need an experience strategy when there's a reason to be revisiting a significant portion of your business strategy. Maybe some sort of disruption occurring in your marketplace, right? Maybe it's something going on with the who, the target that you've chosen. Maybe it's something going on with the competitive environment. Think about why we're all here. We're all here because we support financial services, and we believe that design thinking is a great time. It's a great time right now to bring design thinking to that space to make a real difference with some real purpose, according to why we're here and why we're here for this conference. Banking, right? The role of branches are completely changing for many organizations. You think about wealth management and financial planning, which I have some deep experience in. You've got AI and robo-advising, and you actually have virtual models coming up that have never existed before that people thought would never happen. In property and casualty insurance, you've got connected home and autonomous vehicles, and you've got user-based insurance, which we already talked about a little earlier today as an example. These are all significant disruptions. I can promise you, as you're thinking through those product solutions and the way your customers are going to interact, they're going to interact differently, right? So that means you need experience strategy alongside your business strategy. All right, let's go through the next one. Who does experience strategy? I picked the word does very purposely. I started to write this and say, who creates or who develops? But really, as I thought through this more, I believe there's sort of three role players in doing experience strategy. There's your creators, there's your owners, and there's your influencers. So let's go through those. Your creators are those that come to work every day with a deep skill set in thinking strategically, as well as having user-centered design capabilities and techniques and toolkits in their tool chest. So you could say, okay, at USAA we have a team underneath me called Experience Strategists, and that's them. They're the creators. At USAA, we're actually thinking more broadly. We think creators are both your experience strategist and your business strategist. They together can work more in that symbiotic relationship to drive and create experience strategy. And they'll come in every day to work on projects, right, and do this work. All right, so that's what I posit are your creators. How about your owners? You have to have some sort of owners that actually have to catch this experience strategy and make it happen. So they're part of your doers, right? Because they're the ones who make it come to life. On the next slide, we'll talk about who I think those people are, but you have to have these people in your organization. And Adam talked earlier about innovation outside the lab and around some of the organizational design principles. Your operating model is really important to think through. So you have to have these owners, not just of the agile teams and the designers at the production level, but actually of who's going to own the strategy and the experience related to that strategy. And then you have influencers, and I'd say there's three types of influencers. One's external, that's your customer. Everybody in this room, I'm sure, is pretty adept and values bringing in customer feedback very early and co-designing things with our customers. So you could say, well, then are they creators? Well, no, the creators are coming in every day. Part of their job spec is to do this work. But your influencers are definitely your customers. There's also two internal influencers. The owners, which I just talked about, they're the doers, but they're the doer because they own it afterwards and have to execute it, but they're also the influencers. Because you want to co-design with those owners before they have to catch it and do it, right? And then there's also what I call key stakeholders. These are people with really loud voices at the organization of which your work will either impact or their voice can impact your work. And it's very important to get them involved and help co-design. And although there'll be a lot of activity going on with design methodologies and divergence and convergence and all the work that we all do, we found it very helpful to structure all this work in a very traditional program management way, very non-sexy, not cool. But it was an executive sponsor, a steering committee, a working group. Really sounds boring, doesn't it? And then we created a key stakeholder group to make sure that key stakeholder group had a voice. So again, a little symbiotic of bringing more traditional business strategy techniques to actually an experience strategy and design methodology. All right. Next question. So if that's who does experience strategy, who consumes it? Well, this is a lot easier to answer. First of all, your customer. That's your ultimate consumer of your experience strategy, right? And it's your owners, which I just discussed. So your owners and your customers are both influencers and also their consumers. Your owners have to now be responsible for executing that experience strategy and making it stick and make it happen and evolve it over time. So who are these experience owners? That's going to vary from company to company. I'm sure Adam can help all of us think through this because this is what I think Adam's group is part of what they do. At USAA, we've been on a journey. We're very customer-centric, but like I said earlier, we're pretty product-centric. Our mission is to facilitate the financial security of the military community. But we do it through a provision of financial products. So for years and years and years, it's around how do we help our members with products? And we organize that way. But we've been on a journey to think more through experiences, and we're organizing that way. So now we have roles like experience owners. But now it begs questions, who owns the P&L, right? Who actually owns the processes? How does the experience strategy get all the way down from the ivory tower down into the agile teams and the production designers that are down there trying to make this come to life? Those are all things that your organization should be asking questions about and finding a way to solve for. And when Adam talked about collaboration, my term's not his, is there's over collaboration, you can hyper collaborate. Well, a lot of what I was hearing through my own filter was decision rights and decision authority and role clarity. You need to figure that out in order to make sure those who are consuming experience strategy can actually make it happen, and particularly those owners. So just food for thought. It'll be different at every company. Fifth question, how can experience strategy more directly represent its science versus its art? So my departure point here is that there is science, that there's a lot of work that's done that's proven. We have behavioral science techniques, we have all sorts of things that are really more quote unquote hard or scientific approaches to design. Yes, 3M is making a lot of money off our Post-its and our sticky dotting and our brainstorming, but there's a lot of science. And the reason why I think this question is really important is where I started this conversation, is if we're talking about experience strategy, now you're talking about interacting with design thinking and design methodologies at a much more senior level of the organization. And it needs to be consumable. They're responsible for setting strategy, so they need to understand this language and what it's going to mean for them and what they're going to get out of it. So just put yourself through the mind of the last time you've done a significant piece of work with design thinking that might be more strategic. Well, your participants sit through the methodology of the diverge, converge, diverge, converge, diverge, converge, right? And a lot of really interesting, artful, creative exercises. But we can lose the science. We can lose some of the hard side of it that might resonate more with a business person that's used to 2x2s and chevrons and business consulting jargon and hard words like P&Ls and finance. So we need to make it more real. So let me give you some examples of things that I think are more of the science. Business guardrails. Your senior leaders know what their business guardrails are, and those should be an input to your experience strategy. So continue to remind people how the business guardrails have a role in the experience strategy. Customer insights and facts. We like to know what our customers are telling us. We're customer-oriented or we wouldn't be in this room. Your senior leaders will believe those to be more hard and more scientific. Behavioral economic and science principles and techniques. Those are all proven, right? This is more the science. How about reusing of proven design principles? So design principles of themselves aren't that complicated. And if we can show from project to project and effort to effort how we're reusing ones for our companies, that becomes more the nomenclature and real for them. Divergent and convergent techniques. So I was teasing it a little bit about the process you go through, but the actual technique of diverging and converging is very, business leaders know they have to prioritize. It's a prioritization exercise. It's diverging and being creative and ideating, and then it's prioritizing. That's all very real. And then prototyping and testing, right? Those are all real. So, and I'm sure you all have more you can list. I could have more, but that's what I mean by science, or the harder side of this work. So what did we do at USAA? We pulled the thread of the science as much as we could through that major project that I started with as an example. We said, look, we're going to do customer research in the beginning. Here's your insights. Those insights now drove our design principles. Can you feel it? Can you see the thread? Do you understand it? If you don't, let's pause here till you get it. Now we have these design principles and we have the consumer research. So now you know why we're coming up with these hero moments and the journey maps and the personas that we're doing. So we kept trying to pull the thread from step to step that they could understand how we got there, and more on the harder side, not just the softer side. And the other thing we did is we started thinking enablement early. So first of all, the storyboards and personas were highly effective because they make it come to life, right? It's a great intersection of science and art at the same moment. But then we also were thinking about metrics, and most importantly, we got business people involved responsible for identifying what would be the capabilities that we would need to make this experience strategy come to life. And let's do an assessment of those against what we have and understand the gaps and what it would take to invest to close those gaps. That's all business thinking now. That's a result of because the experience strategy works. So that becomes very real. So those are some of the tools and techniques that we used to make our work bring that science through. At the end of the day, businesses run on metrics, and so we need more of the quantitative side of this work to be right there with the qualitative methodologies, or at least what people perceive to be highly qualitative. And at the end of the day, again, it's experience strategy. So you should have senior executives involved in this work at some point, and it needs to be consumable for them, so we need to do more to make it real. So to close, we're all here because we believe in human-centered design for financial services. I wanted to share a little with you about the experience strategy world of this space. And talking to Jen Brazzelli before I came in here, she reminded me, as she always does, that this is more of a nascent space. This is not as known. It's more, design thinking is very known, but how you apply it to strategic problems. So I'm hoping we inspire the community here to start changing, where we make this more of a domain that's understood and works along business strategy, because I have a huge passion for that. And I hope these 5 things to consider, we had to figure them out implicitly, but if I make them explicit for you, it'll make you think through some things you have to solve for as you're doing more strategy work with design thinking methodologies. So thanks for listening. I appreciate it.
Hey, Greg. Greg, before you leave the stage, we did get one question that came in via Twitter, and I'm hoping you can address that before you step down. What is the place of iteration for business or experience strategy? Is it only revisited after a big change or event?
So I didn't hear the first part of the question. Just reread it.
What is the place of iteration for business or experience strategy?
Where is the place for iteration? So I would say what we're struggling with at USAA is that question. We've had a very episodic strategy development process where once a year we do a big strategy review, and we have some people in an ivory tower, including myself, get to do this work in a black box. We try to bring the business along, and then we bring, for the business part of the strategy, they're along, and then we unveil it. And we say, here's our new strategy, and we do it once a year. It needs to be far more iterative than that, because our worlds are changing much too quickly around us, and disruption is becoming the new way of the way we live, right, and operate. So I would argue the place for iteration needs to come, the way we're doing it is we're looking at it on more of a quarterly basis to provide some process behind this iteration, but we're putting processes in place and techniques in place to be constantly scanning our external environment outside of our consumers, as well as the external environment, meaning our customers, and then creating processes and roles across the company to bring that back on a quarterly basis to say, if we have critical assumptions behind our business and experience strategy, let's interrogate those critical assumptions at least quarterly, and where we're off is what we need to talk about and then iterate. So that's how USAA is trying to solve for it. But there's various different ways, but I would not say it's an episodic thing. The place for iteration should be more continual, but you have to have processes and roles set up to constantly interrogate your critical assumptions behind your business and experience strategy.